Leon Panetta has blamed Trump over the West Asia war, saying that the president is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Another former CIA director, John Brennan, mentioned that there was no rationale to the war, while Joe Kent, former director of national counterterrorism, sent all 18 US intelligence agencies. They said that Iran had no nuclear capacity. We'll be getting you more on this. Let's start with the headlines first.
Iran warns that power plants in countries hosting U.S. bases would be considered targets if the U.S. attacks Iranian power facilities. President Trump had given Iran till Monday to open up the crucial Strait of Hormuz or face a major assault on power plants.
Israel's emergency services say Iranian missiles with cluster warheads caused damage in central Israel, but there are no casualties.
U.S. military says it has conducted more strikes targeting Iran's drone capabilities. The U.S. Central Command released new videos showing strikes on various military targets.
Palestinian residents say Israeli settlers torched buildings and cars in attacks on several villages in the occupied West Bank, with Israel's army condemning violence of any kind. The reported arson came in the midst of a spate of killings of Palestinians by Israeli settlers.
Pakistan government orders to triple the levy on high-octane fuel used by luxury vehicles. It would increase the levy from 100 Pakistan rupees to 300 Pakistan rupees per litre. Socialist Party candidate Emmanuel Gregoire wins the Paris mayoral race. After the victory, Gregoire rode his bicycle to the city hall, where he was given the keys to the city by outgoing mayor Anne Hidalgo.
Albania protesters demand resignation of Deputy Prime Minister following corruption allegations. Demonstrators hurled petrol bombs and fireworks at Prime Minister's office, and police responded with water cannons.
North Korea's legislature has re-elected Kim Jong-un as President of State Affairs. Kim's reappointment as head of highest policy-making and governing body was just a formality.
Asian markets fall as rising US-Iran tensions and threats over the Strait of Hormuz pushed oil prices higher, hurting sentiment. Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi tumbled more than 4% amid fears of supply disruptions and global economic impact.
And Iran's military has threatened to completely shut down the strategic Strait of Hormuz, and that is if the U.S. president acts on threats to target the country's power plants. Listen to this first.
If the United States threats regarding Iran's power plants are carried out, the following punitive measures will be taken immediately. 1. The Strait of Hormuz will be completely closed, and it will not be reopened until our destroyed power plants are rebuilt. 2. All power plants, energy, and information and communications technology, ICT, infrastructure of the Zionist regime will be widely targeted. 3. All similar companies in the region that have American shareholders will be completely destroyed. 4. The power plants of the countries in the region that host American bases will be our legitimate targets.
And this is in addition to its threat of striking desalination infrastructure across West Asia if its power infrastructure is hit.
Now, Hossein Kermapur, Iran's health ministry spokesperson, has warned of humanitarian catastrophe from strikes on power and water systems. Now, he compared it to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
As Trump's 48-hour deadline looms, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that his country would not be swayed by more threats, while adding that the strait is not closed. In a post on social media, he said, I quote here, "Ships hesitate because insurers fear the war of choice you initiated and not Iran," quote unquote.
Now, 20% of the world's crude oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes through Hormuz, but traffic through the vital strait has been brought to a near standstill since the start of the war. In recent days, Iran has allowed some vessels from countries it considers friendly to pass, while warning it would block ships from countries it says have joined the aggression against it.
Iran's parliament is mulling imposing tolls on shipping through the strait. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said maritime traffic would not return to its pre-war status.
Now, and amid this, Iranians in the capital Tehran staged a pro-government rally on Sunday. Many waved Iranian flags and others held images of new leader Mojtaba Khamenei.
Now, the war has entered well into its fourth week now, with Israel and the US continuing strikes on Iran. The US in Central Command has released new videos showing strikes on various military targets in Iran. In a post on social media, CENTCOM said that the US forces continue to eliminate Iranian regime's one-way attack drone capabilities.
And this comes as Trump's Treasury Secretary has said that US may escalate its attack against Iran to be able to wind down the war.
He said he could wind the war down at any time he wants. And Kristen, this is the only language the Iranians understand.
Iran also continues its retaliatory strikes. At least one Iranian missile-carrying cluster warheads was seen in the night sky over Israel, Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank after midnight on Monday. It is yet to be confirmed whether it was more than one missile that was spotted, with smaller bombs spreading out. UAE, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain also reported interceptions of Iranian drones.
And to discuss the situation further, we're now being joined live by Nadir Hashemi, Associate Professor of Middle East and Islamic Politics at Georgetown University. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us. So let me just begin with the situation right now. We're 27 hours into the warning that Trump had given. And so far, when you look at the threats that Trump has given, Iran has retaliated furthermore. There hasn't been any less attacks. Furthermore, they've escalated. Example, the attacks on Dimona and Arad in Israel. Where do you think this is leading in this current situation?
Well, it looks like we're headed for a monumental and catastrophic disaster. And the primary person responsible for this disaster is the President of the United States, Donald Trump. He clearly has bitten off more than he can chew. He thought that Iran was Venezuela and that he could simply send a major American military armada on Iran's shores and that Iran would then capitulate like Venezuela did in early January. And he had no plan B. So now that Iran is fighting back, Donald Trump really doesn't know what to do except escalate, hoping that he can declare some sort of victory. But it's clear that Iran still has a lot of firepower, a lot of stamina, and an ability to shut the Straits of Hormuz. So my own reading is that we are headed for very dark days. If Donald Trump acts on his promise to attack Iran's electricity infrastructure, and then Iran hits back at regional states, then this war is going to increase exponentially in terms of its lethality, its destabilizing effects, and especially its effects on the global economy.
Professor Hashemi, statements like, and rather threats like 48-hour deadlines being set by the US president, is it only set to bring in more embarrassment at this point? Because there is nothing to suggest that Iran is going to be is going to capitulate or is going to agree to these kind of terms or this kind of language coming in from the US. They've made it clear that they're not coming down. They are going to fight back as they are, regardless of how diminished their abilities may still be. They are still able to penetrate through and prove US and Israeli air defenses to be porous with the recent attacks in Dimona and Arad. How do you, is this showing a desperation from the Trump camp at this point that they're still resorting to these kind of statements?
I agree. It is. I don't think Donald Trump knows what to do, and I think he's surrounded by very hawkish advisors who are all in the Benjamin Netanyahu camp, and they believe that just hitting Iran hard enough over a period of time will force a capitulation. I don't see that happening. So yes, I think Iran now seems to be very much in control of the pace and the duration of this war. Let's not forget, for Iran, this is an existential crisis for the Islamic Republic. The United States and Israel assassinated the supreme leader and over 60 of Iran's senior generals, and they've openly been claiming that they want regime change. So Iran is fighting back with everything that they can, and it seems like they want to carry this war on until there can be some sort of resolution where Iran can break out of the box that it's been put in by the United States in terms of these crippling sanctions, and also in terms of some sort of guarantee to be negotiated someplace down the road where the United States and Israel promise they will not attack Iran again. But for that to happen, there has to be some sort of diplomatic track. And right now there is zero diplomacy happening. So if you were to ask me today to bet, I would bet that we're headed for a major escalation of this war with its concomitant global destabilizing effects.
I agree that you're leading to
Yes.
a major escalation, but I don't agree. I wouldn't go as far as to say that Iran is in control at this point. They are taking a major amount of damage.
Yeah.
Correct. They are. I mean, but they were absorbing these blows and they're still firing back.
They are fighting
So,
back, no doubt.
So, I mean, you're right. I mean, let's not forget, Iran is obviously the weaker party here. It can't match the military might of the United States and Israel, both nuclear powers, both major sort of, military might at their disposal. But Iran has been able to play an asymmetric form of warfare where they're putting pressure on Donald Trump indirectly by hitting his allies in the region, by essentially destabilizing the economic underpinnings of his closest allies in the Middle East. I'm talking about the Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, but also on the global economy. And now by closing down the Straits of Hormuz, which is what Donald Trump seems to be very obsessed about, they can continue to pressure Donald Trump. I mean, I'm talking to you from the United States. Over the last, 3 weeks, the price of gasoline has skyrocketed, and it seems like it's going to continue to move in that direction. So Iran has a lot of cards to play here, and all of this talk of, or hope that Donald Trump could initiate regime change seems to have blown up in his face. So I view these statements by Donald Trump that he's going to attack Iran's, electricity grid, which, by the way, is a war crime under international law, as a sign of desperation and frustration from the American president.
And how is this being received at home front? Because as of now, what we see is that there's ex-CI chief Leon Panetta. We have also former CI director John Brennan, and also Joe Kent, who just resigned. They've also been calling out how this war, Trump is being to be blamed about this whole war happening because there was no proof when it comes to no nuclear capacity from Iran. How is this being received in home front and in the U.S.? And is Congress anyhow looking at the situation? And do you think it's somehow in the future Trump will have to give in to the pressure?
Yes, public opinion here was right from the beginning against this war. There's growing signs of discontent and outrage. The ex-CIA chief, Leon Panetta, was very critical of what Donald Trump has started. But I would say that from Donald Trump's perspective, he's riding fine right now, because if you look at his core base of supporters, while there's discontent down below, opinion polls show that Donald Trump still has, solid support among Republicans. They view him as sort of this cult leader. And so while there's rumblings down below among sort of these podcast celebrities like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen, who have a broad following, there's no sign yet that the Republican Party or his base supporters are abandoning Donald Trump. And there's also no signs here in the United States that there's a massive anti-war protest movement happening. And the Democrats, they've been, critical of Donald Trump, but I would argue still mildly critical. It's not like they're trying to shut down the American government over this war, because at some level, most Democrats at the senior level basically share the Israeli and American war aims, that Iran is allegedly the major source of instability in the Middle East. They'd love to see Iran taken down a notch, weakened, or even regime change. So the Democrats have been, they've been critical, but I would say Donald Trump right now can weather the internal political criticism that he's hearing. If this war lasts for another 6 months, and critically, and I think this is the big factor, if Iran is able to increase the American casualty toll in terms of soldiers and downed airplanes and things like that, then the political cost to Donald Trump will rise increasingly, and he'll have a tougher time. So, I think he views what's happening right now domestically as something that he can manage, and I think he's really thinking day to day. I don't think he has a long-term plan.
Professor Hashemi, if you could just stay with us for a while. We'll be slipping into a short break, and because a lot of aspects to be talking about, Israel's perspective and everything, but we'll be right back after a very short break, and do stay with us for that. Welcome back. We're discussing the West Asia escalation right now with Nader Hashemi, Associate Professor of Middle East and Islamic Politics at Georgetown University. Professor Hashemi, so I wanted to know the Israeli perspective in this case, because we've heard statements from Netanyahu saying he's been also indicating ground combat. So when it comes to, of course, they have different objectives, and Trump has also stated that we, at this point in time, Israel and U.S. have different perspectives or objectives of this war. But looking at the 48-hour and the escalation that you have predicted and the catastrophe, what role do you think Israel will be playing at this point?
Well, they're playing the same role that they've been playing from day one. There's now a lot of really solid reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu played a key role in convincing Donald Trump to enter this war. I think both the United States and Israel share the same geostrategic objective, that they want to weaken Iran to the extent where it can no longer project power beyond its borders. In other words, to sum it up, what the preferred option and end game is for Israel and the United States is to see Iran turned into another Libya, Lebanon, or Syria, a broken, fractured country with a weak central authority and a depleted military that can't project power abroad, beyond its borders, so that Israel then will become the regional hegemon, along with other Arab dictatorships for which it already has an alliance with in the context of the Abraham Accords. So Israel wants this to go on, to see Iran as weak as possible. And Donald Trump, up until now, is willing to cater to that Israeli perspective. At some point, I think, when the cost gets too high for Donald Trump personally, then there's going to be a major decision that he has to make to rein in the Israelis. But that's, I think, what Israel is hoping to accomplish.
Professor Hashemi, with that, let me bring back what Jyotsna mentioned earlier regarding Joe Kent, former director of National Counterterrorism Center. He mentioned that all 18 security agencies, intelligence agencies rather, they had mentioned that Iran has no nuclear capacity. And he said this was informed to the US president, And Israel, on the other side, mentioned that Iran is capable of developing nuclear weapons within 10 days and within 2 weeks, 10 bombs within 2 weeks. And that is what the US president eventually believed. Now, this is Joe Kent's version. At this point, there seems to be a larger fracture within the own MAGA base, because Joe Kent was a very audible and very visible supporter of the MAGA camp. Are these fractures only growing within US as people grow disillusioned about what the actual purpose of this war really was?
You're right. I think Joe Kent's resignation was a blow to Trump, because he was from Trump's, Trump handpicked him, and he was a very Trump loyalist, but he effectively said, look, what Trump has been saying about Iran's alleged nuclear program was a gross exaggeration, and the facts simply don't sustain the claims made by Donald Trump. But then that's not really, new to any of us, because Donald Trump has a long track record of distorting the truth, lying, and being unrepentant for his lies. So, no surprise there. The effect that this will have on the MAGA movement now is still yet to be seen. There's a lot of rumblings, but if you look at the polling, because Donald Trump has this sort of cult-like respect among his MAGA supporters, there's been no major breaks among the leaders, or even from the base, that they have departed from Donald Trump. There's just a lot of rumblings and criticism, because we're still in the early days of this war, and the full impact of this war on the average American citizen hasn't really been felt yet. And like I said a moment ago, Trump, I think, can weather this storm, and hoping to win or to declare some sort of victory. The problem is it's going to be very difficult for him to declare victory when it seems like Iran has a lot of fight left in it.
And that being said, because you mentioned fight, of course, they have also threatened that if our power plants are attacked, we'll be attacking power plants of U.S. bases in the regions. They've also there's a threat of striking the desalination infrastructure. When you look at the whole region, the ones that really impacted is all these countries, the Gulf states. And when we look at these, when we look at these power plants of the countries, they've also warned of attacking power plants of countries in the region that host American bases. So that's something that's not just impacting America, but it's also impacting the Gulf states. And maybe if you look at the global, of course, we've seen the impact of the closing of Strait of Hormuz. But do you think that the regional countries or maybe allies of U.S. will be stepping in soon if a catastrophe occurs that you have predicted?
That's a good question. You see these American allies in the Persian Gulf, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. As it stands right now, their economies, their economic planning, their own security is deeply threatened by this war. Iran is, hitting them. There's been some civilian loss of life. Their economies are in a tailspin, but they can't join the Trump and Israeli war effort because of the crisis of legitimacy that these dictators have in the eyes of their own population. In other words, most of the citizens of the region in the Middle East, in the Arab and Islamic world, but also in the global South, are viewing this war through the prism of the genocide in Gaza. And for these Arab states, all of them dictators, I want to emphasize, to join in with Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, it will be viewed by their own populations that they're part of this new imperialist crusade. It would have a huge cost for them politically. And that's exactly why I think they've been very reluctant to sign up and join this war effort, despite the encouragement that many senior American officials have been encouraging them to do so. They know if they do so, they're going to pay a price politically.
That encouragement, just as a parting aspect to our conversation, Professor Hashemi, Donald Trump had asked the people of Iran to rise up. That never happened. There were some hints at Gulf countries getting involved. That hasn't really happened, at least nothing that has been acknowledged. Partners in the region, as far as Japan and Australia, now after a long time, they've agreed to form that coalition along with UAE. But as far as NATO is concerned, Trump has really resorted to threats. as far as getting NATO involved. But nobody really seems to be wanting to get involved. They're all kind of finding their own channel of communication with Iran directly, as we've seen France doing as well. At this point, there seems to be an isolation growing from the geopolitical sphere and within the MAGA camp as well regarding Donald Trump. Let's wait and see how this one goes. He had said 4 to 5 weeks, so we're already in week 4 with no signs of this war abating. That was Professor Hashemi joining us on World DNA. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll slip into a very short break. This is World DNA. Come right back.
Campaigns, elections, alliances, controversies, and power play. Beyond the noise and rhetoric, no election, no ballot issue too small. Stories that analyze global and domestic politics. More than just headlines. A dedicated show with varied perspectives, expert take, citizens' voices, detailed ground reports, and in-depth coverage from political corridors of the world. This is Race to Power, only on WION. World is one.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening, as we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch. In-depth coverage of global issues broken down into facts, figures, and simple words. Backed with analysis from field experts who truly matter, because we believe in decoding the real picture for you. So you get a much wider and deeper understanding of stories from around the world, a 360-degree analysis. An award-winning documentary series, week after week creating the maximum impact. Watch WION Wide Angle at these times on WION. World is one.
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at WION.com.
Welcome back, viewers. You're watching World DNA with Jyotsna. I'm Shivan. Lots more to discuss. Let's start with the headlines.
International Energy Agency Chief Fateh Birol says the global economy is under major threat from the energy crisis caused by the war in West Asia, warning that no country will be immune to its effects.
Israel's emergency services say Iranian missiles with cluster warheads caused damage in central Israel, but there are no casualties.
Iran places Spanish stickers carrying Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's statement on missiles before presumably launching them at Israel. According to videos released by Iranian state media, one of the stickers featured Sanchez's statement calling the war illegal.
Ehtaram, you are fired. You are familiar with this sentence. Thank you for your attention to this matter. The central headquarters of Khatam al-Anbiya.
IRGC spokesman uses US President's "you are fired" catchphrase to mock him as Iran warns that power plants in the countries hosting US bases would be considered targets if the US attacks Iranian power facilities.
U.S. military says it has conducted more strikes targeting Iran's drone capabilities. The U.S. Central Command released new videos showing strikes on various military targets.
President Trump shares a video of a TV comedy skit that a British Prime Minister Keir Starmer hoping to dodge a phone call with the American leader. That's what the skit shows. Trump has repeatedly railed against Starmer since the start of this war, accusing him of not doing enough to support the US.
Pakistan government orders to triple the levy on high-octane fuel used by luxury vehicles. It would increase the levy from 100 Pakistan rupees to 300 Pakistan rupees per litre.
Socialist Party candidate Emmanuel Grégoire wins the Paris mayoral race. After the victory, he rides his bicycle to the city hall where he was given the keys to the city by outgoing Mayor Anne Hidalgo.
In Albania, protesters demand resignation of Deputy Prime Minister following corruption allegations. Demonstrators hurled petrol bombs and fireworks at Prime Minister's office, and police responded with water cannons.
Gold extends decline after its worst weekly drop in over 4 decades, falling below $4,500 per ounce. Higher oil prices boosted inflation concerns and reduced expectations of interest rate cuts, pressuring the non-yielding metal despite some dip buying support. PM Modi chaired a high-level meeting in New Delhi to assess the situation in West Asia.
Now, the meeting was to review India's oil, gas and fertilizer supply, and it also focused on the Strait of Hormuz disruptions and energy security. Several senior leaders, including Union Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, Petroleum and Natural Gas Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, attended the meeting.
The primary focus of the meeting was to review India's energy security in light of the rising tensions in West Asia. India relies heavily on imports from this region. Any disruption can directly affect the country's economic stability. PM Modi emphasized that ensuring the country's energy security remains a top priority and that efforts must be made to minimize the burden on citizens.
On the 12th of March, PM Modi had said that the war in West Asia has triggered a worldwide energy crisis. He said it is a critical test of national character that requires dealing with circumstances through peace, patience, and increased public awareness.
Since the West Asia conflict began, PM Modi has had telephonic conversations with leaders from several countries involved, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar and Israel. The war began on the 28th of February when the US and Israel launched joint strikes on Iran. Iran has retaliated by targeting Israel and several of its Gulf neighbors who host US military bases.
Since the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran began, Tehran has allowed very few ships to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the partial blockade has resulted in severe disruptions in the energy supply to a number of countries, including India. The Strait of Hormuz is a vital maritime choke point, and that handles nearly 1/5 of the world's seaborne oil trade. Now, with U.S.-Israel war on Iran in its fourth week already, and U.S. President Donald Trump facing mounting criticism for it, a former U.S. Defense Secretary and Central Intelligence Agency Director says that Trump is stuck between a rock and a hard place after weeks of conflict.
Well, speaking to The Guardian, the former CIA chief, Leon Panetta, blamed the West Asia crisis on the U.S. president, saying it was not an unexpected risk. He pointed out that for years, U.S. security officials have known that Iran could disrupt global oil supplies by blocking the Strait of Hormuz. Targeting Trump, Panetta also said that Trump tends to be naive about how things can happen.
Now, he told The Guardian, and I'm quoting right him, this is not rocket science to understand that if you're going to conduct a war with Iran, one of the great vulnerabilities is the Strait of Hormuz. Panetta, who has served in the Bill Clinton and Barack Obama administrations, has warned that failed planning, rising oil prices, and weak alliances risk wider conflict.
For Panetta, it is a crisis of Trump's own making. The ex-CIA chief had questioned the outcome of the military push and stressed that it has not weakened Iran the way the U.S. had expected.
Now, Panetta said, and I'm quoting again, "We replaced an old guy, a supreme leader who was near death at a time when the people of Iran were willing to take to the streets with the hope that they could ultimately change their way of government. And instead, today we have a more entrenched regime. We have a younger supreme leader who is going to be there a while, and he's much more of a hardliner than the first supreme leader. They didn't turn out too well."
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is a vital maritime choke point that handles nearly 1/5 of the world's seaborne oil trade. The partial blockade of the strategic waterway amid the ongoing West Asia crisis has resulted in severe disruptions in the energy supply globally. The Israeli military is gearing up for targeted ground operations in Lebanon.
Israel has already been bombing parts of Lebanon, including Beirut, targeting Hezbollah as Iran-backed group continues to launch missiles into Israel.
The Israeli Defense Forces have deployed vehicles, choppers and soldiers along the Lebanese border to intercept several projectiles entering Israel. Earlier, the IDF destroyed a key bridge linking southern Lebanon to the rest of the country. Israeli strikes hit Lebanon's Kasmieh bridge after Israel's defense minister ordered to destroy more bridges over the Litani River, which Israel says are Hezbollah terror hubs.
Now, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has condemned Israeli strikes on bridges and other infrastructure in the country's southern region. Aoun called the attacks as a flagrant violation of Lebanon's sovereignty and a prelude to a ground invasion.
The Israeli military said that it will expand its ground operations in Lebanon. IDF chief Eyal Zamir approved war plans against Hezbollah in Lebanon, saying that they are preparing to advance targeted ground operations and strikes. Zamir added that the operation against Hezbollah has only begun and would be a prolonged operation.
Furthermore, Israel said it has launched a probe on whether one of their civilians have been killed by its military. The IDF spokesperson said that they are investigating the circumstances of the incident. Israeli health authorities identified the victim as Ofer Poshko Moskovitz. They alleged that the 61-year-old resident in northern Israel was killed in a missile strike by Hezbollah.
Now, amidst these attacks, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said that members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, they are commanding Hezbollah's operations. Salam once again lashed out at Hezbollah for dragging Lebanon into this West Asia war by launching missiles into Israel.
We have some breaking news coming in right now. Israel says it is carrying out fresh wave of strikes on regime targets in Tehran.
The IDF says that it has launched a wide-scale wave of airstrikes in Tehran targeting infrastructure. Iranian news agencies reported explosions in capital Tehran early on Monday morning, with Fars saying airstrikes had occurred in multiple locations. It reported that airstrikes targeted areas of Tehran, specifying 5 areas, and that terrible sounds of explosions have been reported.
All right, for people just joining in, Israel has now said that it has started carrying out fresh wave of strikes on regime targets in Tehran. IDF has said it has launched a wide scale of airstrikes in Tehran targeting infrastructures, specifying 5 areas that terrible sounds of explosions have been heard from. And this is the Iranian news agency that has also reported explosions at the capital, Tehran, early on Monday morning, with Fars saying that airstrikes had occurred in multiple locations.
Now, they've reported that airstrikes targeted areas of Tehran, specifying 5 specific areas and that terrible sounds of explosions have been reported so far. This as the war only seems to be intensifying well into its 4th week now. That's the latest we're tracking for you. Israel says that it is carrying out a fresh wave of strikes on regime targets in Tehran. As far as the targets are concerned, they have gone after the military infrastructure, this time specifying that these are regime targets. IDF says it has launched a wide-scale wave of airstrikes in Tehran, and these strikes are coming in from Israel just less than 36 hours after Dimona and Arad were targeted by Iranian missiles.
And this also comes as Donald Trump, U.S. President, had warned that 48 hours were given to Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, it's 27 hours after which he had announced it. From that time, he posted on Truth Social. And now we see Israel, who has now carried out fresh wave of strikes on the regime targets in Tehran. We've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu also talking about attacks and talking about ground combat. Of course, that is to be seen how it happens. For now, there have just been fresh wave of strikes on regime targets.
More breaking news coming in. An Indian national was injured in Abu Dhabi due to debris falling in the Al Shawamek area after a successful interception of a ballistic missile.
Now, the United Arab Emirates has said that its air defenses had responded to the Iranian aerial attacks in which this Indian national has now been injured due to this debris falling in Al Shawamek area. This is they of course have been intercepting these missiles coming in from Iran, and now we have news where an Indian national has been injured by the debris that fell after the UAE had taken down a missile. All right, to give us more details, our assistant editor for Foreign Affairs, Sidhant Sibul, is joining us. Sidhant, this is the latest that we know. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, yes, the UAE authorities have confirmed that an Indian national has been injured when debris fell after the interception. Now, we need to also know the fact that this is not the first case. There have been such instances where Indians have been injured. In fact, since the West Asia war started on 28th of February, we know 6 Indian nationals have died, 1 is missing, and we also know the fact that the Indian missions, the Indian authorities are in touch with the local authorities regarding safety and security of Indian nationals. In fact, the Indian Prime Minister's conversation with all West Asian leaders, if you look at the readouts, the Indian Prime Minister has particularly highlighted the fact that the Indian side is grateful for the safety and security of Indian nationals. There are approximately 1 crore Indian nationals in West Asian region, of which the largest number are in UAE. Almost 35% of UAE's population are Indian nationals. Many of them play an important role in the society of that country. And we saw over the weekend as well the UAE ambassador assuring the Indian side, the Indian community, that there is nothing to worry about and they are being taken care of. But of course, as the war enters the 4th week, this is, of course, a development which is worrisome, the injury of an Indian national.
Siddhant, thanks so much for getting us the latest. That was Siddhant Sibal, our Assistant Editor, Foreign Affairs. The latest, what we're bringing for you is that an Indian national was injured in Abu Dhabi due to debris falling in the Al Shawamek area after a successful interception of an incoming ballistic missile.
All right, moving to some other stories. In France's municipal elections, the socialists have held firm in the country's major urban centers,
retaining power in Paris and Marseille. And this offers a boost to the mainstream left parties ahead of next year's presidential race. In the French capital, socialist candidate Emmanuel Grégoire has been elected as mayor, defeating conservative rival Rachida Dati after assuming victory. Based on early results, Grégoire rode his bicycle to the city hall where he was given the keys to the city by outgoing mayor Anne Hidalgo.
Thanks to this broad mobilization, the Union of the Right will not be running Paris, because everything in the soul of our capital rejects the idea of a shrunken Paris, the idea of a Paris that sorts its inhabitants. This evening, the women and men of Paris have sent a message to Jordan Bardella, to Marine Le Pen, to Sarah Canafo, and to those who have worked behind the scenes for the union of these factions of the right. And this message is clear. Paris is not and will never be a far-right city.
Grégoire's victory extends more than 25 years of socialist control in the capital, where dozens of left-wing activists and voters celebrated his victory.
The election followed a tense campaign that saw Grégoire accuse President Emmanuel Macron of meddling in local politics. The socialist frontrunner had taken a commanding lead with more than 12 points ahead of Dati, who served as culture minister under Macron.
I failed to convince people sufficiently that change was not only possible, but above all, necessary. I also suffered disgraceful and false attacks, which are absolutely unacceptable in a democracy where all democratic principles have been trampled. The poison of division has taken its toll.
In Marseille, incumbent Mayor Benoit Payan has been comfortably re-elected, defeating a candidate backed by the far-right National Rally. The result reinforces the left's position in France's second-largest city, where the far-right had been targeting a breakthrough.
I want to tell you that I am aware of the magnitude of the task and that I am also aware of the honor bestowed upon me this evening. I am aware of the responsibility that, in the current situation of the country, is mine here and ours in Marseille.
Beyond the headline wins, the results show some political fault lines. Alliances between the mainstream left and the hard left La France have largely underperformed. Grégoire's campaign also maintained distance from the alliance despite pressure between the two rounds of polls. In several cities, these tie-ups failed to secure victories even with combined vote shares, with candidates from the centre and right benefiting thereafter. Well, it's one war, but the crisis has been far bigger than the battlefield. What began as a geopolitical flashpoint is rapidly turning into a multi-layered economic disruption.
And that being said, energy, trade, food, inflation and growth are all under strain at the same time. So how is one conflict triggering 5 simultaneous crises? And how deep could the global economic impact go? Our next report explains that for you. Take a look.
The global economic impact of the ongoing conflict is unfolding in multiple layers, starting with energy and trade. At the center of the disruption is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but critical route through which nearly 20% of the world's oil supply moves. Any threat to this corridor immediately tightens global supply and pushes oil prices higher. Markets are already pricing in risk, with crude expected to remain elevated if disruptions continue. But the impact extends beyond oil. Shipping routes are being rerouted, tanker movements are slowing, and insurance costs are rising sharply due to heightened security concerns. This is increasing freight costs and delaying cargo movement, creating early signs of stress in global trade flows. The second layer of the crisis is now visible in food and inflation. Energy prices directly influence agriculture. from fertilizer production to transportation. As fuel costs rise, fertilizer supply chains come under pressure, pushing up input costs for farmers. At the same time, higher logistics costs are making food more expensive to transport and distribute. This is feeding into a broader rise in food prices globally. The impact is also reflecting in headline inflation. Economies across regions, including Europe, are expected to see a measurable increase in inflation due to energy-led cost pressures. This is a classic cost-push inflation cycle, driven not by demand but by supply disruption. The final and most significant risk is to economic growth. Higher energy prices lead to rising inflation, which in turn limits the ability of central banks to ease interest rates. Prolonged high rates increase borrowing costs, reduce consumption, and slow down investment. This creates a feedback loop, where supply shocks begin to impact overall economic activity. There are growing concerns that if the conflict persists, it could trigger a broader global slowdown. Emerging economies remain particularly exposed due to their dependence on imports and sensitivity to price shocks. For countries like India, the impact could be more pronounced, with pressure on inflation, currency stability, and fiscal balances. Business Bureau, WION, World is One.
Let's shift the focus to what's making news in the world of showbiz after Papa Acedo has revealed that he received racist death threats after being cast as Severus Snape in the upcoming Harry Potter series. Acedo shared that he was told to quit the role or face harm. The 35-year-old actor, who will be stepping into the iconic role earlier played by Alan Rickman, called the experience disturbing. Despite this, he said the negativity has only strengthened his resolve to do justice to the character. Acedo added that the role is a long-term commitment and could shape the next decade of his life. The new series is expected to be released next year.
American actor Amanda Peet has opened up about her battle with breast cancer in a deeply personal essay. The 54-year-old star revealed that a routine scan last year detected a small tumor. After further tests, doctors confirmed that it was stage 1 cancer, which is considered treatable. Peet shared that the cancer was found to be hormone receptor positive and manageable. A second mass was later discovered but turned out to be benign. In her essay, the actor also spoke about the emotional strain of dealing with her diagnosis while being present during her parents' final days.
Canadian actor Carrie-Anne Fleming breathed her last at age 51. She died on February 26 in British Columbia. Fleming was known for her roles in shows like iZombie and Supernatural, along with several horror productions. She began her career with television roles and went on to appear in projects like Masters of Horror, where her performance gained attention. The industry is mourning her loss, remembering her for her work across film and television. All right, with that, we call a wrap to World DNA for today. News and updates will follow on the other side. You're watching WION World is One. Stay tuned.
Campaigns, elections, alliances, controversies, and power play. Beyond the noise and rhetoric, no election, no ballot issue too small. Stories that analyze global and domestic politics. More than just headlines. A dedicated show with varied perspectives, expert take, citizens' voices, detailed ground reports, and in-depth coverage from political corridors of the world. This is Race to Power, only on WION. World is One.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening, as we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch. WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation.